So imagine that you are at Barack Obama's inaugural speech. You're listening to him talk, and we want to kind of figure out how we actually hear the sound that is coming out of the loudspeakers echoing his words. So the sound leaves Barack Obama's mouth through the loudspeakers and travels as a wave propagating through the air, one particle hitting another. And eventually, that gets to your ear. And it causes a pressure change in your ear that changes rapidly over time. And that pressure change, your brain interprets as Barack Obama's voice over a really loud crowd. You're still able to pick out his exact words. How does your brain do this? What I'm going to tell you today is that we hear things in terms of frequencies. Sound is best understood in terms of frequencies. And it's okay if that doesn't make total sense right now, but I promise it will by the end of my presentation. Today I'm going to talk about three main things. Basic sounds, how to use basic sounds to build up complex sounds, and then how we can kind of use that knowledge to break down sounds in like a sound analysis type thing. So first, basic sounds. To do this, or to explain what basic sounds are, first I'm going to play a couple for you so you can understand what I mean. So basically, a basic sound is a tone. Or more specifically, it's a sound wave that has one frequency. And to do this, let me explain a little bit about this diagram. As I mentioned before, a sound in your ear is just a pressure change over time. So a basic sound, or a tone, is a sound that changes at one specific frequency. So in this case, we have a C note. And this sound is changing at 523 hertz, or 523 times per second. The pressure is going positive, negative in your ear. And you guys can hear how this sounds very basic. What you're hearing is the frequency. So when I increase the frequency to 659, it gets a little higher in pitch. And then 784 is a little higher. And 932 is a little higher. These are notes on the scale. So those are basic sounds, and the key takeaway to remember is that a basic sound is a sine wave. It is a pressure change that is one frequency, and this is going to be really important later. So let's talk about using these basic sounds to build up complex sounds. If I show you this, which is a pressure change over time, this is the sound, does anybody have any idea what this is going to sound like? Probably not. This looks really complicated, but let me play it for you. Probably sounds a little bit familiar. This is because this sound is actually just a combination of the four basic sounds that I just played for you. It's a chord, to be specific, it's a C dominant seventh chord. Now, I'm going to do a little demo to show you what I mean by this is a combination of those sounds. Quite literally, I mean if you add their waveforms together, you will get that. So we'll start with a basic C note, right there, and I'll go ahead and add an E note. So you can see it's kind of starting to take the shape of that C dominant seventh chord. Then I'm going to add a G note. You can see it's a little higher, but it's still, this is just, I literally am adding piece by piece, pressure by pressure. And lastly, when I add a B flat note, it takes the shape of the C dominant seventh chord. So literally all I did was just add those four waveforms together to get this guy, just basic math summing them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remind you of what each of these sound like really fast. And now I'm going to play this guy for a little bit, and I want you to try to listen and pick out one of these basic tones. Your brain will be able to separate out at least one of these, perhaps multiple if you have a tuned ear, when I play this. So the point is, this didn't sound like something totally unique by itself. You heard this in terms of the basic components, in terms of the basic sounds. And this can be said about every single sound. This can be said about you hearing the words coming out of my mouth, even if that's not so obvious yet. So, now that we've talked about building complex sounds out of basic sounds, let's talk about breaking down these complex sounds, like the words coming out of my mouth, so you can understand them in terms of basic sounds. This is called sound analysis. By sound analysis, I mean breaking down waveforms like this into this. So how do we do that? You have to remember that all of these sounds are just math equations. They're functions of time. So this is a pressure change over time, and these are sine waves. One frequency is a pressure change over time. So if you remember, this is 523 hertz, 659, 784, and 932. But they are pure sine waves, one sound. We have this thing in electrical engineering called the Fourier transform. Looks like kind of a scary equation, but you don't have to understand it. The takeaway point is that this equation gives you a recipe from how to build this out of these guys. So for instance, the Fourier transform might tell you that the recipe is 3 times this guy, plus 90 times that guy, plus 17 times this, plus 6 times that. What it does is it takes in a frequency, and it takes in a function like this, and it says how much of 523 hertz is in this function? 3. How much of 659 is in this function? 90. And what you can do is you can kind of think of these as energies. So this guy right here, according to this recipe, has a lot of 659 hertz. It's going to sound predominantly like a 659 hertz tone, but it's going to have elements of these guys in it. And you can actually take these energies and these frequencies, and you can plot them together. So here I have frequencies in the x-axis, and I have energies. So in this case, and this is called a spectrum, this sound right here would sound predominant like a 200 hertz tone, but also have some elements, strong elements of 100 hertz, and other things. This is really important. My voice has a spectrum right now. When you're listening to my voice, I can plot it right here, and you'll probably have like different peaks at certain recognizable places. And that is how your brain recognizes my voice as my voice. It's in a certain frequency band. So today we've talked about 3 main things. Basic sounds, which are tones, sine waves. Then we talked about how you can combine these basic sounds or sine waves to build up a more complex sound, like a chord. We then talked about sound analysis, which is how you can break down arbitrarily complex sounds, for instance my voice, into just sums of basic sounds. And I really mean like you can take the function that is my voice and you can write it as a sum of just pure sine wave tones. So now I'd like to revisit, the takeaway point is that we hear things in frequencies. We hear things in terms of the frequency, not in terms of the actual pressure change over time. When I have a wave like this, I don't hear a squiggly thing. I hear 4 different tones that make up this wave. So now I want to revisit the original example I started with, which is that you're at Barack Obama's inaugural speech, and you want to hear Barack Obama talking through the loudspeaker over the crazy, noisy crowd all around you, all the other background noises. How does that work? Now you have enough material to understand it. The sound leaves as a changing pressure from the loudspeakers and travels through the air, one particle hitting another, all the way until it gets to your ears. It causes a pressure change in your ears, a rapid pressure change over time. It's very complex. It looks even more complex than that C dominant 7th chord that I showed you before. However, this pressure change includes all the other sounds that are getting to your ear. It includes the noisy crowd. It includes your heartbeat. It includes the air in your lungs when you're breathing, the person next to you talking. But somehow, you still manage to pick out Barack Obama's voice. How do you do that? Your brain can do sound analysis. It doesn't do a Fourier transform, but it has these things called hair cells, each of which individually is tuned to pick out one specific frequency, and it's got millions of them. So your brain actually takes this and turns it into that for you. It has a natural sound analysis built in. Then, you know what Barack Obama's voice sounds like. You've heard him talk before. As soon as you hear him talk, you learn very quickly which ones are his. And your brain tells certain hair cells, hey, I want to listen to you, and certain hair cells, I'm not going to pay attention to you. It blocks them out. And you're able to hear Barack Obama's voice over this loud, noisy crowd. Quite literally, you hear things in terms of frequencies. Even though it's a pressure change over time in your ear, your hair cells pick up sound frequency by frequency, not as an individual pressure changes at this millisecond or at that millisecond or at that millisecond. So when I say sound is best understood in frequencies, I mean quite literally that is how you hear it. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'd like to open it up for questions.